all of those things that were in Star Trek, they became reality. That's the power of Imagineering, or the power of imagination. That is the power of future walking backwards rather than the present walking forwards. And that little transponder, while Star Trek was still on, became the first generation of cell phones. And it's impossible for me to tell my kids or convince them that there was a time when there were no cell phones. Try telling it to your kids, especially if they're 17, 18-year-olds, and mine are 20, 21, and 16-year-olds. It's impossible. I mean, I tell them, and they don't believe me, that there was a world in which there were no cell phones. And I remember people not having phones. I remember, aunties from the neighborhood coming to one's house because you had a phone. And people would call and say, "Ki ji, aapki call aa rahi hai, thodi der mein phone karenge, neighborhood se bula de." And this auntie would come stumbling for that phone aa raha hai. And it was fantastic. And you see how fast the world has changed. It was just the power of imagination. And I remember as a kid asking myself, how could there be a phone if there's no wire? What would happen? There's no wire, so how does it go? And where would it go? And then it went all over. Now when I walk into the room, my nephew, my children, they're playing very crazy, very violent games with kids in Denmark. How do you even connect? I didn't even know where Denmark was. And how did you connect with these kids in Denmark? And what are you guys talking about with these little headphones and, yeah, kill him, kill him. How did all this, he's behind you. How did all this happen? It's all power of imagination. And that's what we need to celebrate the most. And if you remember that little food generator, where they would go and press a button and coffee would come out, that became microwave. And space, the ultimate frontier. Now for $1 million you can take space tours, actual commercial space tours. I mean, there are people who fund campaigns by more than $1 million. So people in Pakistan, many people in Pakistan, can now take commercial and visits to space for fun, for vacation, for the heck of it, just for going up in the air. So much for the frontiers. So all of these frontiers crumble in the wake of imagination. As we imagine and as we articulate, we continue to break these barriers of possible, not possible. What is that Shaw's little phrase that people look at things the way they are and ask, why? I imagine what is not and ask, why not? And I think that basically are the two different ways, and I have quoted it wrong, but that's what it was about. But that's how it works out. And it was just, I believe, in 1895 when Lord Kelvin said, how can something heavier than the air ever take off? This is for the Air Marshal who was just telling you what he's been able to do and people who've gone into the space. Just 100 years ago, people couldn't imagine something that is heavier than air. How can it fly? And this was the leading physicist and the mathematician in the United Kingdom at that time. And just in, I believe, 1947, I believe Thomas Watson said, there's probably a market of 5 computers in this world. And how many now you count on a table? And then I think Digital, the largest computer company, they in 1977 said that, there is no need for individuals to have computers. No need for individuals to have computers. I can't even take notes. I carry this little thing. I was sitting there fumbling, dropping pen and then coffee and then water bottles because I was trying to take down notes for this conference. And it's all, so future is anything but a linear projection of the present. If there is anything we know in this room, is that what is absolutely, what you can be certain about is discontinuity. So preparing for that discontinuity, I believe, is where I would try to leave Pakistan in 2047. And what kind of discontinuities can come about? There's so many of them. Some of them have been mentioned. But I think the contours of the future would be defined by 4 key things that are happening right now. I think the future would be defined by nanotechnology. I think this whole journey of building atom up to material, and a material which has zero waste, and a material which miniaturizes everything, that I think is going to be a fantastic future. And I'm talking about 2047, I'm not going farther down. These are the things that are actually going to happen because you've already begun to see 3D printing. There's no rocket science there. I think the future is also going to be defined by biotechnology. I think at some point in time, as I always say, jokingly perhaps, that death would be looked upon as an illness. Because we've decoded the genome. We know what this is all about. We're already creating organs in our petri dishes. If we're already creating organs in the petri dishes, how long would it take for us to erect these organs again? We're already taking undifferentiated cells and we're programming them to become the liver and the heart and this and that. We haven't gotten into the complexity of brain, but all of these things are happening. The little tapeworm is already living 7 times its natural age in the lab. So why would your children not live for 200 or 300 years? It's beyond me. But the rate at which technology commercializes, the rate at which technology has commercialized, I ponder, I ask myself, why would it not happen? It won't happen to me. It probably wouldn't happen to you or some of you. But why wouldn't it happen to your grandchildren? I mean, things that you're doing now, you weren't 10, 20 years ago, you weren't expressing monoclonal antibodies in crops. Now you are. In mice, ovary lines, now you are. So if you're expressing human proteins, if you're expressing human organs in labs and various systems, what is going to stop you? And are you prepared for that? I mean, right now, when people are already kind of in the Western world, they have designer babies. You can program to have a certain color of eyes and so on and so forth. So this entire the pictures that you see on television and movies, the pictures about these robots taking over the world, that's not going to happen. Sorry, I mean, I had to break your heart. It's you who's going to take over the world. Once you're programmed, how are you going to tell? What part of you is a robot? What part of you is science that has programmed you? And what part of you is left that is the original human? So that cyborg, the world that would have cyborgs, not robots. Who would be human and who would be half human? Who would be a programmed kid? And what level of programming would you lose human? All of these things are already happening. All of these things are happening in the lab. Now the question is, when does it come about and start to enter our lives? And that is the future that we are talking about, because that is what is getting commercialized right now. So I think the world is going to be defined by this platform. I think the world is also going to be defined by cognitive sciences. I mean, I was watching this specially abled people's Olympics on YouTube. And there were these people who had illnesses that had paralyzed them, neck below. And then you see them in that Olympic getting up. You see no exoskeleton. You don't see anything. You don't see any wires coming out. You don't see anything. They just think of something, and somehow the other, whatever the thing gets into the support system that they have, whatever they put around them, and then they get up and they run and they kick the ball. Now, how does this happen? In order for their thought to become an action, one would have needed a wire, a cable that comes out to the brain and gets into the arm and tells the arm to move it forward, but it doesn't happen. So this entire thing about cognition, human intelligence, translating itself into certain kinds of actions, that is the future. And information is the future. You're already seeing bits and bytes already becoming virtual reality. You're already seeing that. Now you put all of these things together, this intelligence that you can tap into, without wires, without cables, without putting anything, with any implants. You put that with bits and bytes becoming virtual reality. And you build all of this up with nanotechnology, with miniaturization. And you have these little implants which are nano because they come from nanomaterials. And you will be unable to tell what part of you with this programmed intelligence and programmed bits and bytes and programmed biology is still human as we know of it. So my question is that with all of those things actually happening in commercialization, should we not do what happened with copper and wireless? Countries that did not have copper, they found it faster to jump over the copper and go straight to wireless. So in order for me to imagine Pakistan 2047, I ask myself, we certainly don't have the copper. We're still talking about primary health care. We're still talking about basic education. We're still talking about things that the world has taken for granted. And we still today, in 2022, my friends and myself, we are talking about what if women had some rights or equal rights. We're talking about this in 2022. We're talking about having decent education for children in 2022, and primary health care, and infant mortality, and child mortality, and all of those things. That's what we're talking about now. That's the copper that we don't have. And the world that I've laid out in front of you is that wireless world that we can jump to. The question is, do we have the willingness, do we have the political will, and do we have the faith and belief that yes, we can? Because if we do, then we have to ask ourselves, what would it take, rather than what can we do? I mean, I think the bunch of things are going to come about, some of which have been mentioned. On top of these trends that I'm talking about, these basic building blocks, or competence blocks, or sciences, or platforms, or whatever you want to call it, I think the world of energy is going to change. And it's not, I think the world of energy is going to be green. I think the world of the future of energy is going to be sustainable, it's going to be green, it's going to be renewable, it's going to be decentralized, it's going to be efficient. And at some point in time, we can possibly have zero energy smart cities, or zero energy homes, or zero energy countries. Now that's already happening. And it's happening in our neighborhood. In Abu Dhabi, they have a city which they're calling zero energy. So I'm not talking about some rocket science thing that may or may not come about. I think the world is going to get more and more globalized. I think we're going to have virtualization of production systems, of innovation systems. People are going to tap across boundaries into these teams that sit everywhere. You've already seen it in this COVID epidemic, even in Pakistan. Look at how seamlessly, how fast people were to adapt, and how fast people were to kind of begin to use whatever those little, Zooms, and I don't want to advertise anything, but Zoom has become Xerox in our life now. So, how fast people zoomed. Did you see that? So I see that happening. I see borderlessness in terms of production systems, virtualization of teams, putting arms together, hands together, and building up things that previously cannot be could not be built. I see in technology convergence. I don't think you can build up a retina if you don't have the materials, which is engineering. That material has to speak to biology, so I can't see how it can happen without an understanding of biology. So I not only see miniaturization, but I also see convergence of sciences, convergence of technologies. And I think this information thing, the bits and bytes that I spoke about, I think it's already doing that, but it would create the democratization of information. And that would change the way we educate ourselves. That would change the way our entire conception of school and university is going to change with this democratization of information and the availability of information and what I call the enfranchisement of people, because people living in our part of the world have been completely disenfranchised. And that is because of the copper thing. And with this wireless thing, and I'm using this as a metaphor, that because of the copper limitations we couldn't, and because of this wireless, we can jump. We can jump and get there faster and hopefully successfully. And these things are already happening. All of the elements, I mean, you've seen Tesla, and that is now, not in 2047. You've seen smart cities, and that's now, not in 2047. You've seen this big store in San Francisco where you have a virtual wallet, and if you pick up something from the shelf, it basically takes the money off your account. And if you look at it and you don't like it and put it back, it puts the money back. This is already happening, and there is no employee